can only ever hear one side of these headphones, so I'm always very paranoid about how the audio will turn out. But let's get it. Hi, my name is Jacob with HOTDPod. Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides, which is yet another Velaryon named episode. So, first of all, we have yet another significant time jump. Previously, we've had time jumps of like 10 years. This one's been 6 years. And with that, I also think we're sticking with the actors that we have now. Meaning the actors portraying the characters currently are the ones that will be there till the end of the show, with the exception of the newer born babies. So a brief overview, a few things have changed since we last saw the gang. Daemon and Rhaenyra are now married and have children. Laena's children, Rhaena and Baelor, are now being raised separately. Rhaena with her father Daemon on Dragonstone, and Baelor with her grandmother Rhaenys on Driftmark. So we open in High Tide, where Princess Rhaenys sits the Driftwood throne in Corlys's absence. The Maester here brings Rhaenys grim news of Corlys. He has been off fighting in the Stepstones for the last 6 years, and as a result has suffered a very serious injury, one that is possibly life-threatening, and therefore the issue of succession to the Driftwood throne is in question, with both of Corlys and Rhaenys' children dead. And so Vaemond Velaryon here comes to put himself forward as a candidate to be heir of Driftmark, arguing that he is Corlys' own blood. You remember he gave the eulogy at Laena's funeral in the last episode, and the issue of this Velaryon blood was serious to him back then as well. Unlike Corlys, who said history only remembered names and was willing to turn a blind eye to the legitimacy of his grandchildren. Here he says Driftmark can't possibly pass to Lucerys as Corlys intended, because Luke has no Velaryon blood. He doesn't look Velaryon, hell, he isn't even raised in the Velaryon ways. The Velaryons raised their children, their sons in particular, to be seafarers and sailors. And Luke, Jace and Joffrey, far away from Driftmark, are not raised in that way at all. Additionally, he says he's finna go to King's Landing and plead his case before the Queen, because we learned that things in King's Landing have also changed. So where King Viserys might have turned Vaemond down immediately, Alicent and Otto, now ruling in his stead, would be more likely to hear him out. Baelor quickly sends warning to her father on Dragonstone, however, of Vaemond's intentions. Meanwhile, on Dragonstone, we see exactly how Daemon goes about stealing dragon eggs. These eggs he intends on putting in the cribs of his children with Rhaenyra. We see Jace getting lessons in High Valyrian and a yet again pregnant Rhaenyra. Daemon gets the warning from Baelor about Vaemond heading to King's Landing. And now with Vaemond claiming that Rhaenyra's children are bastards, her own claim to the Iron Throne could be questioned as well. And with the Hightowers ruling, it wouldn't end well for Rhaenyra, and so they decide to also go to King's Landing. And once they are there, they see for themselves just how much things have changed. Firstly, nobody's there to receive them and welcome them. Lord Caswell, however, does come to greet them. Lord Caswell is interestingly a Rhaenyra loyalist. We also see King's Landing is more religious, it seems. This because the Hightowers, of course, are quite big on the faith, being from Old Town, which is essentially the headquarters of the faith. Much like the Vatican would be HQ of Catholicism, I guess. And Alicent herself has taken to wearing the symbol of the faith on her as well, with this cool ass chain. Here in the Small Council, we see her playing her part as queen, with her father Otto serving as hand of the king. Otto is informed about the arrival of their guests. Interestingly here, he inquires as to whether they were greeted as befits their station, which were also his instructions, which shows the meticulous game that Otto is playing here. Basically showing what he thinks of Rhaenyra and Daemon, in that he doesn't rate them at all. The Small Council speak on the issue of succession on Driftmark. Lord Tywin Lannister pointing out here that Lucerys was not raised on Driftmark, and questioning whether as Lord of the Tides, Luke would even have the ability to command a fleet on those tides. We see another Rhaenyra loyalist in Lord Lyman Beesbury, who argues that his ability shouldn't alter his claim. Alicent dismissing herself, saying that they would hear Rhaenyra and Vaemond's petitions and then decide the matter then. An interesting cameo here as we see Sir Eric Cargyle of the King's Guard bring word to Alicent. The Queen confuses him with his twin brother, Sir Auric. Really creative name choices from their parents here. The book describes the twins as being so identical that even their sworn brothers couldn't tell them apart. Interestingly, the twins would also go on to fight on separate sides during the dance. Sir Eric tells Alicent that Aegon is up to some shady business unbecoming a prince. Shady business that Alicent sees to immediately. Speaking to this maid servant here named Diana, we find out that Aegon raped her. Now, Alicent knows her son better than anybody else, and she believes the servant, knowing what Aegon is capable of. She does, however, do some damage control on his behalf, stressing to the servant that she cannot repeat this to anybody else, saying that nobody would even believe the word of some serving girl who seemingly enticed the prince in the first place. Subtlety is the name of the game, and this is the threat veiled in subtlety. Some character work here as well, as we see how, as the years have gone by, just how capable of playing the game Alicent is, and how proud her daddy must be of her. Alicent bribes the servant as well, as threats alone aren't good enough. And for good measure, she has another servant bring her a cup of moon tea to make sure that Aegon doesn't father any bastards by her. You can also see the conflict of emotions that she's going through here. After all those years ago, she was on this moral high ground when she learned of Rhaenyra's own situation with the banging and the moon tea. And now that she's in a similar position with her own son, she's actually working, pulling the strings to keep this under wraps. Some would call her a hypocrite, but she does confront Aegon, though incredibly upset, reprimanding him on the latest of his disgusting, shameful acts. I actually like to see this from her, because all that talk she had for Rhaenyra of duty, of sacrifice, it seems she holds the same standards for her children as well, and won't simply sit by idly should they veer from those standards. In truth, some of this is born from treason, because Alicent wants Aegon in particular to uphold these standards because she sees him as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, the rightful future king. And a sad sight here as Helaena comes in, who is now Aegon's sister wife. Seemingly oblivious to what happened, she asks for the same maid that Aegon raped, because she's supposed to dress her children. And so we also find out that their children, the twins Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, and possibly the younger Maelor Targaryen, exist already. Children of significant importance later on. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra and Daemon are checking in on the king. Now we see Viserys is in terrible shape, as he can barely even recognize his own daughter and brother. And it looks like he's really just being kept on bed rest, away from all the matters of the crown. Kept on a constant supply of milk of the poppy, he's in no condition to be king. And Rhaenyra and Daemon see this. They tell him of Vaemond's planned petition and ask him to intervene in support of Lucerys' claim. They also introduce him to two of their children, yet another Aegon and Viserys, who is named after the king himself. And in the books, Rhaenyra's son Aegon is called Aegon the Younger, to avoid confusion with Alicent's own son Aegon. Viserys is in too much pain and has brought some more milk of the poppy, which Daemon takes a long whiff of, which is suspicious to them, because in the next scene we see them talking about how Viserys looks terrible and how they should get a second opinion from their own maester, not one that works for the Greens. Alicent shows up to greet them here, and there's a bit of a standoff now. The Blacks all but accusing the Green Queen here of keeping Viserys addled on milk of the poppy while they rule for him. And Alicent reminds them that her and her father will be the authority when they present their petitions before the court the next day. And now we get Luke and Jace back in the training yard trying to mind their own business. And they are noticeably drawing the eyes of all present here. Luke saying it's because they look more like Sir Harwin Strong than they do their father Sir Laenor. And they watch in as my guy, the sly Aemond One Eye, spars with Sir Criston Cole and wins. Then asking his nephews if they are here to train as well. Obviously there's still some lingering tension between the boys after all these years as well. And speaking of tense, Vaemond is finally in King's Landing and wastes no time in speaking to Otto and Alicent here, letting them know that should the crown back his claim in this matter, they would have the naval might and wealth of the Velaryons on their side, a major advantage of its own. On the flip side, however, Rhaenys and Rhaenyra have their own chat, with Rhaenyra trying to clear the air. You see, Princess Rhaenys is of the mind that Rhaenyra and Daemon had her son Laenor killed so that they could get married. Rhaenyra denies this, of course, which is the truth, and seeking an advantage of her own, she asks Rhaenys to back her son's claim to Driftmark. See, Rhaenys, after all, is the wife to the current Lord of Driftmark, and her opinion on the matter would perhaps be one of the more important ones. And in exchange for this backing and support, Rhaenyra offers to betroth Laena's daughters to her own sons. Viserys to Rhaena, who would eventually become Lady of Driftmark, and Jaehaerys to Baela, who would eventually become the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, with her own children being heirs to the Iron Throne. It's a pretty generous offer, or a desperate one, as Rhaenys so boldly points out. Now Rhaenyra here has a private moment with her father, Feeling overwhelmed, she asks him if he truly believes in Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire, and if he was right in naming her heir and placing that extremely heavy burden on her, begging him to defend her and her children's claim. Viserys, so faded off the milk of the poppy, just blacks out, and it seems to Rhaenyra like surely all is lost. First without the backing of Rhaenys, and now without the backing of her father and king, who seems incapable to even do so. It's the day of judgment, and we see Otto presiding over the petitions. Vaemond goes first, talking about the history of House Velaryon, of how Driftmark must pass to him on account of his true Velaryon blood, all while throwing slights at Rhaenyra and her children. And to be fair, he does put forward a good argument, because it must be so frustrating to him, seeing everything his Velaryon blood and family built over the generations possibly being lost to the bastards of Sir Harwin Strong, even though their name is technically Velaryon, because ultimately this is about the survival of the Velaryon bloodline. With that done, Rhaenyra is about to give her petition, and here I think we see just how much Rhaenyra means to Viserys, as he shows up having rejected a dose of milk of the poppy and very painfully makes his way to the throne room to defend his daughter. It's very noble of him, because this man will not change his mind about Rhaenyra. He slowly and painfully makes his way to the throne, to everyone's surprise, telling Otto that he will be sitting the throne today. He even drops his crown as he makes his way and requires Daemon's help to take the final steps. With Viserys on the throne now presiding over the affair, he expresses his confusion, because to his mind, the issue of succession was already decided. And so he calls on somebody who would know the wishes of Corlys Velaryon better than anybody else: his wife, Rhaenys. And having made her choice on which side to stand by, she reiterates for all to hear that it was ever her lord husband's wish that Driftmark should pass to Viserys, calling him Sir Laena's true-born son, and that she supports this wholeheartedly. Having done her part in backing Rhaenyra, she also announces the other part of the agreement, in that Rhaenyra wishes to marry her sons to her granddaughters. This pleases the king, and he reaffirms Viserys' position as heir to Driftmark, which pisses Vaemond off, who forgets himself in the presence of his king, calling him out for breaking laws and tradition by naming his daughter his heir. But how dare he gets to decide who inherits the name Velaryon. He goes on to call Luke no true Velaryon, calling the rest of the children bastards and Rhaenyra a whore. King Corpse here is vexed and draws his dagger, demanding Vaemond's ton for treason. But Daemon was on full-on around and find out settings here, and he swiftly takes off Vaemond's head with Dark Sister, in defense of his wife, of course, which marks an end to the proceedings, clearly. Personally, in this episode, I felt like Viserys knew that he didn't have much time left. Here we see him get the dinner with his family that he requested earlier. He's pleased to see his family all gathered, but expresses how much he regrets that they all couldn't have been closer, with a final plea for them to put their differences aside for the sake of the old man standing in front of them. Showing you, I think, how important it is to Viserys that these people get along, putting in a bit of foreshadowing about how the crown cannot stand strong with the House of the Dragon divided. And he is successful in part, pulling on the heartstrings of Rhaenyra and Alicent here. He manages to get them to exchange some praises and good words for each other, reminding us also just how much alike these two characters are as well. The children are not so easily convinced, however, and their attention is clear for all to see. Aegon taking a dig at Baela, Jace getting pissed off, and Vaemond just ready to dispatch these mandem as usual. But they do keep the peace for the sake of their father and grandfather. And what follows is what we can call the calm before the storm. With seemingly improved spirits in the room, Viserys gets to watch his family act like a normal, loving family one last time, even though it probably is just pretense. It's all too much for him eventually, and it needs to be carried back to his room. And as he's carried out, a roast pig is carried in and placed before Vaemond, much to Luke's amusement, because as you remember many years ago, the boys had mocked a dragonless Vaemond, bringing him the pink dread, a big pig with wings attached to it. Amused by the sight, Luke is chuckling to himself, which vexes Vaemond, and he toasts the toast straight out of the book here, doing a very cleverly worded toast to his nephews, calling them handsome, wise, and strong, saying, "Come, let us drain our cups to these three strong boys." Because strong, but like So how in Strong's bastards? My man is playing 4D chess. Jace and Luke take offense, of course, and we get an altercation, which ends with a wordless face-off between Vaemond and Daemon. And this was the moment for me in this entire episode, because this is personally my favorite rivalry in the book. The night does, however, end with one final amicable moment between Alicent and Rhaenyra. Again, the calm before the storm and foreshadowing. Rhaenyra explaining that she will come back to King's Landing once she's returned the children to Dragonstone, and that she would be returning on Dragonback, which I'm sure will get referenced when she does indeed return on Dragonback, albeit through different circumstances. And now you may have forgotten about her, but boom, we see the Lady Massaria and the status that she's risen to after all these years, and just how far her reach spreads, as well as we see the very same servant who brought Diana that moon tea is working for her. So Massaria has spies on the inside of the Red Keep as well. And now to close it off, Alicent brings Viserys his final dose of milk of the poppy. Viserys thinks Alicent is Rhaenyra, however, and is kind of just muttering about their earlier conversation. The conversation about Aegon the Conqueror's Song of Ice and Fire. Thinking he's talking to his daughter, Viserys says, "The prince that was promised, it is you. You are the one. You must do this." Alicent is confused as hell, and understandably so. So she walks away from this conversation thinking that Viserys was talking about their son Aegon, and that she is the one who must ensure that he rules. Fully convinced at this point that Viserys has changed his mind on Rhaenyra. And with Viserys' dying breath, he calls out to his one true love, Emma. And here the book says, "And so Viserys of House Targaryen closed his eyes and went to sleep. He never woke. Then the storm broke and the dragons danced." Because RIP the king, but this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Viserys' death means that the dance kicks off soon. So yeah, that's it. This might have been the best episode for me personally. As usual, very good foreshadowing happened. We got to see the older versions of the children who will play out the dance. Poor Viserys trying so hard to make things right, but just falling short. And Paddy Considine as Viserys. George Martin wasn't kidding when he said the show version of Viserys is much better than the book version, just because I think he has so much more depth. So I'm gonna rate this one a solid 9.8 out of 10. So yeah, I'll be back here for the next thing. Until then, peace.